All right, good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm going to call the committee to order, and we're going to proceed with the second meeting of the Corporate Services Committee. During the COVID-19 emergency, this is a virtual meeting. You can check the city's website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via the live stream on YouTube and the city website. And the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternative formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or call 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. And we have quorum. All committee members are here, although we do not have Mayor Holder with us at the moment, but I will start with item 1, which is disclosures of pecuniary interest. And looking at committee members, I see none. So we will move on to the consent agenda. I am actually going to pull item 2.8 myself, and Councillor Hamu, as our vice chair, will take the chair for that item. But I'm looking to committee members to see if there are any other items in the consent agenda that they would like pulled. Seeing none, I will look for a motion to receive 2.1 through 2.7 of the consent agenda, and then we can have some discussion on it if folks wish. Moved by Councillor Fife-Miller, seconded by Councillor Hamu. And I will look to see if there's any discussion on any of those items. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments on the items. First, I'll comment on the item that I put on the agenda, which is the report from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors meeting. It was a hybrid meeting. However, Councillor Cassidy and I both participated digitally, given the content of the meeting, and there was no government lobbying at this particular meeting, but it was still a productive meeting. There were a number of sessions run, and colleagues can review the report, and I know either one of us would be happy to answer any questions that you have about that report anytime. The other item I wanted to comment on was the BIA budgets. And I'll just make a general comment on all of them because I've reviewed them all. And I know a number of our BIA colleagues are listening in to this call and available for questions. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you to those who serve on BIAs. I know it has been an incredible amount of work to provide services to the businesses and communities in your areas throughout the pandemic. And once again, you have submitted a series of budgets, I think, that recognize the challenges that are faced in the BIA areas in our city, and the plans that you're putting forward to try to help mitigate and address business impacts. Certainly not every area of the city has that advantage, but I very much see the work of BIA as being a huge advantage. And I think, as you have seen over the past couple of years, BIAs have adjusted and shifted their budgets to prepare themselves for both assisting businesses through COVID and anticipating the recovery period and the programming and spending that will have to happen through that period. And so I think these budgets represent both that shift and the continuation of that shift of money, as well as that foresight and planning into the future. And I think that these areas are well positioned to weather the current challenges and that businesses are facing, as well as be well prepared to partake in the recovery phase. So well done to the BIA members, the boards and their staff for putting forward a number of really well thought out budgets. I don't have any criticisms or questions or anything on them. I think you did a good job of articulating them in the documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. Are there any other speakers to the consent agenda? Seeing none, we will open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
And the next item to deal with is 2.8. This is the election sign bylaw update. I did pull this one myself, so I'm going to turn the chair over to Councillor Hamu so that I can speak to this and propose a motion.
Thank you. So the 2.8 is up. Do I have, yes, Sean. Sorry, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So colleagues, I did ask to pull this one. I'm going to actually look for a referral to send this back to staff, but I want to provide a little clarity on what specifically I want to provide some direction for here, so that, you know, I'm not just referring this back. There's actually going to be an intent for some direction here, and I've got to provide a little bit of.
And do I push Chrome? Okay, I've got East Drive here.
Sorry, Your Worship, you're not muted at the moment. We're hearing you in chambers.
He's muted. Okay, so go ahead.
Thanks. So I will just pick up with what I was saying there on the election sign bylaw. So I actually presented to corporate services as a citizen in 2017, the last time this came forward. And I'm going to share that I'm actually disappointed to see a number of the same recommendations that were rejected in 2017 coming back, and the reasons for that. And there are particularly 5 items that I want to address here. The first is moving the sign locations back 3 meters from the road to 5 meters. And I think it's very important, colleagues, that everyone understand. So you're going from 9.8 feet to 16.5 feet. There are yards, front yards in our community that are not 16.5 feet deep, particularly where the ultimate road allowance has already been taken by the city for various infrastructure projects, for sidewalks, for those kind of things. So if we go from 3 meters to 5 meters, we're in effect telling some residents, you're not even allowed to have an election sign because your front lawn's not deep enough. I think that in itself would be a very wrong move to make.
He's finished. Thank you so much.
We have a recommendation that the removal period be shortened from 96 hours or 4 days to 72 hours. And I think probably as ward councillors, we all say, well, 72 hours, we can all get our signs down in 72 hours. But I think that we have to keep in mind that this also applies to mayoral campaigns and the federal and provincial campaigns of MPs and MPPs, a much larger geographic area. And all of these campaigns depend on the goodwill and the support of volunteers. And people have jobs, they have commitments to their children. It might be a day or two before a volunteer is able to go out and help bring in some signs. And to say to folks, we're going to shorten it from 3 to 4 days, I don't think that there would be that much of a noticeable benefit for the public, but it would certainly make it much more difficult for campaigns themselves. I also want to provide some direction to clerks to clarify the language around campaign offices. And I've encountered this myself, but I know others have as well. Right now, it's interpreted that the signs on a campaign office must be affixed to the building. And particularly given the restrictions we have on our own municipal campaign signs, I think it's reasonable to say if somebody has a campaign office, the sign should be allowed on the property. In some campaign offices, they're actually set so far back from the road that you won't be able to see them if they're attached to the building. But if they're put in the parking lot area, for example, they may be able to be seen. So I think there needs to be some clarification around what is allowable signage for a campaign office. And then we come to the 0.09 meter height in the 5 to 8 meter allowance. And this one really stuck out because I talked about this in 2017 as well. What you are essentially saying, if you restrict to the 0.9 meter height, is that we no longer allow the large size campaign signs. Even along major arterial roads, you will be reduced to lawn signs only, which frankly along arterial roads present no particular benefit. And then the final piece that I'd like us to refer back to staff to give some consideration to, and again, this comes to treating the federal and the provincial campaigns equitably, is currently federal and provincial candidates can start putting out their signs day one of the campaign when the writ drops. And I think it's important that colleagues understand There is a nomination period in the federal and the provincial campaigns as well. Candidates have to collect their signatures, go to the returning office, be verified by Elections Canada before their name can appear on the ballot. And that happens during the campaign period. So we don't hold them to the close of nomination day before signs can go up. We say on the day that the writ opens, you can start putting up signs. Now, certainly for ourselves, municipally, that would be a little bit more of a challenge because our writ period is so long. Starts in May and runs up till election day in October. However, I do think that waiting until nominations are closed presents a particular challenge in municipal campaigns. And I would suggest, and I'm going to include this in my referral, and we'll see if people support it or not, that we allow municipal candidates to put up their signs 1 week prior to nomination day. And I think we have to realize what signs can do for the public. It allows, in some cases, people to consider the opportunity of whether or not they want to stay on the ballot, whether they perhaps want to withdraw. They look at, there's 3 other campaigns that are way ahead of them in the sign count, and they might say, you know what, I like this other person. I'm going to withdraw and support another candidate. Or it alternately lets people take a look and say, oh, well, there's only signs up for 2 people, and I don't want to vote for either one of them, so maybe I'm going to put my name on the ballot myself. They do provide a visual indicator to people of where campaigns are. And I think particularly since we're moving, unfortunately, in my opinion, but we're moving away from ranked ballots and back to first past the post, allowing people the opportunity to at least evaluate the support from signs that other candidates have gives people an opportunity to consider whether they want to be on the ballot and potentially be involved in a vote splitting situation. So having provided some rationale, I'm going to move a referral back to staff with the following directions. That the amendments to 3 meters to 5 meters, the 96-hour removal period, and the 0.9 meter height restriction are deleted from the recommendation. And that further direction is clarification of placement of campaign office signs on campaign office property and changing the eligible sign period from nomination day to 1 week prior to nomination day. I don't know if I have a seconder for that, but those are the 5 points of direction I want to provide, Madam Chair, and I'll look to see if there's a seconder on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Lewis's motion? I have Councillor Fife Miller. Okay, I do have some speakers, so we're going to switch over to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So first of all, I understand that Councillor Lewis doesn't like looking at this again, even though we looked at it in 2017, but that is exactly what we do with our bylaws from time to time. We look at them again. And we've had the benefit of an election that has been run since the changes were made in 2017. And we saw the feedback from the public on those, on where we are with our election sign bylaw. And I admit it was not a huge sample of people, but it was not an insignificant number of people either that responded to this survey. Frankly, the way we allow election signs in this city is nothing but visual pollution of our city. And I will share with you that during the 2018 election, I unfortunately lost a dear friend. And right in the thick of the election, in October, I had to drive to Guelph to attend her funeral. The difference between London, Ontario and Guelph, Ontario during the municipal election was beyond night and day. There were election signs, yes, but the the glut of signs that we see here in London especially during a municipal election. I would contend that it is worse during a municipal election than it is during provincial or federal. And it is fine to say this and this and this is best for the candidates. But what about the citizens of London? I would say that election signs are the least informative or useful piece of information for people voting in a municipal election. A sign is just a sign, and there used to be an old saying that people would say is that signs don't vote. So it really didn't matter how many signs you had out there in public, signs don't vote. But they do many other things. They distract, they visually obstruct in many cases. And they make our city look unattractive for a long period of time. I won't support this referral back. And in fact, if the referral fails, I would like to move an amendment on the distance between signs for the same candidate. We tried in 2017 to make that a longer distance, and on a close vote, I would say that distance was shortened, and I would like to see that distance increased to 500 meters between signs for the same candidate. So I won't support the referral. I do have two quick questions for staff. Number one, when do we have to have this bylaw complete in order for it to be in place for the next election? Number two, when I read the bylaw itself on page 72 of our agenda package, 3.3 says, no person shall place or permit to be placed an election sign for a municipal election on a campaign office. Oh, sorry. No, I was reading that wrong. So I did want clarification on Councillor Lewis's comments about nomination day. Does that mean the close of nomination, or does it mean once a candidate has their 50 signatures and has filed their nomination papers with the city clerk? And if it is the former, then that would be another amendment that I would make. So if the referral fails, I would amend this bylaw so that there is a greater distance between two signs for the same candidate. And I would also amend it so that a candidate can start putting their signs up once they have filed their nomination papers.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. We are going to move to Mayor Ed Holder now.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm going to support the referral. To address one of the comments, why we have so many more.
Order. I asked two questions, Madam Presiding Officer. I would like answers to those questions.
Sorry, yes, no, my apologies as well. Staff?
So it wasn't a point of order on the mayor. That's very thoughtful, Councillor Cassidy. Thank you.
It's on me.
Through the chair, this is Michael Schulte speaking. The 3.3 question through the chair to Councillor Cassidy. The way I read that, the earlier than the day that the candidate has filed their nomination with the city clerk. Now, was there a question out of that wording? I was unclear of whether you had a question related to that.
I wanted the clarification. Is it when a candidate has filed their papers, or is it the close of nominations?
That would be the filed their nomination with the clerk. So that's not just the gathering of the names piece, if that answers your question.
I think that answers my question. And then my second question is, what is the deadline for this bylaw to be finished with us at council so that it is in place for the next election for May 1st?
Through the chair, we do have time to get that in place. Obviously, there's a candidate information session that we have upcoming, but I wouldn't consider that would be a showstopper for not having this in place, because we do have the 2017 bylaw that can be referred to. Now, as far as the actual deadline, perhaps if I could just ask Ms. Corman to speak to the deadline.
Yes, there is an upcoming provincial election, so we would want the new bylaw in place before that, and that's anticipated to be June 2nd. So we do have time to take this back for a referral.
Thank you.
Okay, did I finish up that? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Firstly, I'm looking for I'm looking for that information from Councillor Lewis in terms of his referral and the details there. I presume that wasn't sent in advance, and I'm going to challenge colleagues, all of us, that if we put some real thought into this, which clearly Councillor Lewis has, it would be exceptionally helpful to have that in advance. And if I missed that, that's on me, but I didn't see it. And there's a lot to it. So colleagues, please, when we do these things, the worst thing on the planet is to try to look at this and make sense of the details, notwithstanding the reasonably lucid and clear comments by Councillor Lewis. It would just be helpful to have all of that in advance. And again, if I missed it, I'll take my lumps on that, but I didn't see it and I don't see it now. So is there a spot where I can see the reference to the referral points from Councillor Lewis?
I believe it's an e-scribe.
I'm an e-scribe. And I'm looking for the current item here, which I have, and I see no details there.
Keep scrolling.
Life is a scroll.
Your worship, sorry to jump in here, but if you expand, if you click on the votes tab in eScribe on this item on the right-hand side, you will be able to see it's a motion number 2. The language is in there.
All right, I'll look for that there. But let me just come back to the points. I think Councillor Lewis is making some sense with those that I've heard verbalized. The reason that we have so many signs in a municipal election, by the way, is we have 14 wards and a citywide campaign. Last I checked, we had 14 people running for mayor then, and some with modest number of signs, others with lots, and I'll put my hand up for that as well. So to note that there are a lot more signs in municipal campaign, for sure. I don't think that's unexpected and unreasonable. I think the notion of my sense is putting the signs up as soon as you've registered is not appropriate, but having some time frame around the nomination date, it might well be, as Councillor Lewis has suggested, may make some sense. I have a question through you, Chair, to staff, and what I'm trying to understand is relative to election day, what's ultimately changed since the last election as far as when I look at things from 3 meters from 5 meters to the roadways, what roadways would be limited by that restriction? I'm sure you put thought into that.
Staff?
Through the chair, this is Jeannie speaking, Manager of Elections. The 3 to 5 meter roadway restriction would apply to all city roads. It's a safety provision put in due to sightline concerns based on the public feedback. So that would apply to all the places that the current 3 meter restriction applies to. And I'm not sure if we do have some people here from transportation who may wish to also speak to the change between 3 to 5 meters.
As they do, and I appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand if that would limit, for example, in residential areas, signs to lawns versus boulevards, where the 5 meter starts from, just to get a sense of that. And so I'm just trying to get a feel for major roadways versus residential areas.
Staff?
Through the chair, this would apply to residential areas as well as arterial roads. So there would be no distinction. This is applicable as a safety provision on all roads.
And could you just clarify then, please, through your chair, the measurement is from the center of the road, where we have, like, where's that 5 meters begin as far as the roadway is concerned?
So the 5 meters is measured from the edge of the roadway We do have some people from enforcement here as well who may wish to speak to the actual act of measuring from the roadway and how that looks on all roads.
Yes, please.
Chair, this is Heather Chapman from Municipal Law Enforcement. I believe maybe what we are seeking clarification on here is roadway versus private property. So when you're in a residential area, the way I read this bylaw, the provisions apply to city property. It's not preventing anyone from placing a sign on their own private property, regardless of the distance from the roadway. And I may need my colleagues in the election sign, the clerk's office, to confirm that.
As they do that, please, could I ask again, Chair, and I don't mean to be interruptive here, but as Councillor Turner often reminds us, when people think that they've got a certain amount of property that's their own, it really belongs to the city. So what I'm trying to understand is what is meant then by your roadway. And basically what I'm trying to understand is, where does the measure begin? If there's a certain roadway allowance that the city has from basically the center of the road, if I have that correct, right through a certain number of feet, what are we talking about in terms of whether it's residential or arterial? Doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to understand so we can give good advice for the upcoming provincial and know ourselves come the municipal.
Chair, this is Heather Chapman again from Enforcement Services. If we are looking at a bylaw that doesn't stipulate in the bylaw where the measurement is taken, we would take it from the closest portion of the roadway. So in front of a residential property, not from center line. So from the limit of the roadway on either side is where the distance would be measured on either side of the roadway.
Chair, again, I'm prolonging this a little bit because, and maybe the referral back will bring some clarity to this. So it means there will never be a boulevard sign, and maybe that's appropriate. It can't be based on what Ms. Chapman just indicated to us. And I think it would be really important for people then to ultimately know where their property begins and where the city doesn't, so that if they want to participate in the democratic process of putting up a sign, they're not on the outs or in defiance of the law. No one wants to do it the inappropriate way, but if it's not the center of the road, then we would have to, then where there can be challenges will be what that measurement looks like, because again, as we know, the private area of an individual's residence, I mean, this could go potentially up to their porch or whatever it might be, or depending on the measurements and road allowance. That's why I'm a little nervous about this, because I'm not understanding it. And if this referral takes it back and clarifies, I think that would make some sense to me. I guess I'm looking for some comfort there, but I'm not sure I'm hearing it yet.
The measurement is taken from the roadway. The roadway is defined as the part of the street that is improved, designed, or ordinarily used for vehicular traffic and includes the shoulder. So in an instance of a residential area, it would be measured from the curb or the side of the roadway.
Yep. All right, I will thank you for that. I'll support the referral.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. The next person is Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that Councillor Morgan has his hand up and is on the committee and hasn't had a chance to speak yet. But Councillor Cassidy asked a question that I'm going to re-ask of staff, and this is really important in terms of Part E of the referral, which, based on what I heard from the city clerk, may not be necessary. And I say this respectfully, and it's no intent to proverbially throw anyone under the bus. But our former city clerk had indicated to me that nomination day in the bylaw was interpreted as the close of nomination day, not the registration of a candidate. And I see some nodding of the clerks to our side right now. So I'm looking for very very clear indications here, because I actually agree with Councillor Cassidy. I don't want to see them necessarily go up on May the 1st or 2nd when the nomination period opens and somebody files their papers. So through you to our staff, Madam Presiding Officer, as written right now in the draft bylaw, the nomination day, as defined, is that when a candidate has filed their registration papers and been received by the clerk as an official candidate with their signatures and everything and their deposit paid, or is it the close of nominations, which I believe the province has moved to late August now, rather than I believe last campaign it was around Canada Day. But can we get some clarification in this bylaw? When can signs start to go up for municipal candidates?
Staff.
Through the chair and Councillor, direct you to section 3.2 of the draft. No person shall place or permit to be placed an election sign for a municipal election, except an election sign which is placed on a campaign office earlier than nomination day, and that is defined. And the nomination day means the deadline to file with the city clerk under the Municipal Elections Act 1996 as amended. Now, I suspect the confusion is that 3.2 simply refers to has filed their nomination with the city clerk. Certainly, we can undertake to clean that up to make that in accordance with 3.2 if that is the direction that's given.
So just a follow-up question on that then. So as it's written right now, no candidate, regardless of when they file their papers with the city clerk, no candidate can place any signs other than their campaign office until the nomination period has actually closed. Is that correct?
It's earlier than the nomination day, and the nomination day, you're quite correct. It's, I believe this year it's August 19th, which is a Friday. It closes several days after that. So the nomination day would be August 19th, and no sign can be placed earlier than that nomination day.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'll have some other comments to offer, Madam Chair, but I want to give other members of the committee and visiting councillors an opportunity to speak first. So perhaps if you can move my further comments down until after Deputy Mayor Morgan and Councillor Van Holst have had their opportunity.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Lewis. We're going to move to Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fine to wait until your committee members have spoken, but I'll just make a couple brief comments then. I think I do support and most of the referrals that Councillor Lewis is suggesting. I would guess that many people were choosing those in the survey or supporting those simply because what they really want was no election signs on public property. So I wonder if that may be the direction we should be going in. Also mention that in a county down in Florida, I noticed that when they were having a municipal election, they had certain areas of public property where signs were allowed. So on the city property, the city properties, this is where you could have signs and no other places. So that might be a way for us to deal with that, to balance it out. When we're making, as another suggestion now, when we're coming up with a limit, I think we could go both ways on it. For instance, if a sign shouldn't be closer than 3 meters from the roadway, but they can be within 1 foot of a house, for instance, or so that if someone's yard is very short, they still have an opportunity to put a sign in because we put a restriction or a direction on the other side of that as well. I do think that in terms of the positions of the signs and the height of the signs, I was more or less okay with the last election. But we might certainly consider having fewer signs or coming up a way to have fewer signs on our public property. I would note that signs on private property kind of tell you how much support a candidate has. Signs on public property tell you how much money a candidate has. And those are, two different things. They're not both as helpful to the candidates. I also do think there's some virtue in Councillor Lewis' suggestion that there be a time slightly before that period for people to rethink how their chances or their desire to have an election. He's suggesting 1 week. That might be 2 weeks would be a better way, at least for people to have a little more time to make that determination. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I'll start with a couple of questions of our staff. When was the survey in this report conducted?
Through the chair, that was in October of 2021. I believe it ran for 3 weeks, beginning October 6th through to October 27th, I believe. It's roughly three weeks in October of 2021. And there was also text responses received by the elections office. I presume that those came in around the same time, but I'd have to defer to Ms. Raycraft for that information.
Through the chair, yes, the survey was available from October 6th until the 31st, and the only public comments received were through the survey that was available online.
Okay, so I think it's important to know the context under which the survey was collected. The federal election had just happened, and I think we all recognize that signs were very bad during that election. They were all over the place. There was lots of issues with where they were placed. And so there was, the survey was conducted right after that, which is good in one way because it's right fresh off of the results of an election. It's also not ideal in one way because people are reacting to something very specific. That being said, I think I do appreciate that a number of people took the time to fill out the survey, and that's important. What I am most interested in this is like fair and democratically run elections. That means that we provide opportunities for people to express themselves and to be competitive in elections. And I am in an awkward situation on this because I don't particularly like the way the referral is worded because it is definitive on the changes. I don't particularly like the report, the way it was conducted, because it seems to be almost solely based on the survey. And what I would have been most interested in was knowing the impacts of the changes, something that the mayor was getting at. If you change from 3 to 5 meters, how much of the city is now eliminated from the possibility of signs? Like what are the actual impacts of these changes? The other thing I would have appreciated is that there are entire like academic departments and journals associated with the study of democracy and the impacts that signs have. Everybody is going to spend today speculating and what the impacts are of these changes. You could say, guess what? If we make these changes, it's going to benefit incumbents because you're going to give no opportunity for new people to get their name out. But you could also say incumbents already have a stack of signs ready to go, and they have access to money, so they're best able to put up signs. Like all of those are our own estimations on what we think is happening, and it would have been valuable to me to actually get some actual summaries of some of the research that has happened out there in many different jurisdictions to say, here are the impacts of your decisions on a democratically run election. There are very few things we can control in the election. There are very few things that we can make decisions on that can impact the election in the way that a signed bylaw can. Obviously, we had our opportunity to change the type of election from first past the post ranked ballots. That was taken away from us. Would have been great to continue with that. I think that would have been better for competitive elections than a first past the post. So I also contemplate these changes with the election system in mind, and that incumbents are going to have a big advantage this time around, bigger than they had last time. And so I'm interested in a referral, but I'm actually interested in a referral more so to give our staff some time to bring back some information on what the impacts of these changes are, the types of things we could be considering on how the election will be run, and the opportunities for people to express themselves and the democratic impacts of those as at least a section in the report. Otherwise, we can tweak the numbers all we want. And like I said, I'm not even sure, as the mayor got into, I'm not even sure of the impacts of these changes. I don't know how many roads it wipes out. I don't know how many fewer signs, locations there are, the opportunities to do. I haven't gone out there, it sounds like Councillor Lewis has, and measured how high like 0.9 meters is compared to the existing signs that you usually see. It seems to me, if you stick a sign 5 meters back and you only make it 9 meters tall, you may as well not have signs on that street at all, because they're going to be so far off the way and so low to the ground. If that's what we're trying to do, then that's the vote that we should be having. So I'm going to listen to my colleagues. I'm a little unsure on the referral. I'm also a little unsure on the report, because I don't think it has the information for me to make the type of decision that I want to make with a report like this. And that is understanding the impacts that will actually happen based on our decisions. And I can't see that from this report at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. We're going to move back to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So I will say a couple of things. Number one, if we're talking about a boulevard between a sidewalk and the road, it's explicitly written in the bylaw that that's not allowed. If we're talking about the road allowance in front of somebody's private home, in practice, candidates, I would say, never put signs there, because homeowners hate it. Because even if it's not their property, if the homeowner has not asked for that sign, I would never go out and put a campaign sign in front of someone's house, because the implication is that that homeowner is supporting me as a candidate. So it may be within the bylaw and follow the bylaw and 5 meters or 3 meters or whatever the meters are from the roadway. If it's in front of somebody's home, there's absolutely no way any smart candidate would ever put an election sign there. I will say, again, going back to this visual pollution and this 10-meter separation now being suggested to be slightly increased. We did see, as Councillor Morgan, Deputy Mayor Morgan pointed out in the most recent federal election, that there were a lot of signs, again, on the arterial road. So you go down the road and you see the same candidate sign every 10 meters. And in a federal or provincial election, then what you're going to see are 4 candidates' signs spaced apart every 10 meters. It's not good for London. It doesn't make London look good. And what I will say is we have the air show running at the same time as the municipal election, and we have visitors to this city. And I have had comments made to me by visitors to this city. I have seen multiple comments on social media of what London looks like during the air show while they're visiting our city. The other point about the sheer quantity of signs is this council declared a climate emergency. We had staff create the climate emergency action plan. Every policy that we create as a city and as a council is supposed to be viewed through a climate emergency lens. I would say, as Mr. Wallace, who sent us a letter on this very issue, as he pointed out, the two don't jive. Seeing thousands upon thousands of election signs on every possible public space in the city with plastic everywhere is not a good look, and it does not speak to our declaration of a climate emergency. If we have time to look at this again, I am not averse to that, and I agree with Deputy Mayor Morgan that if we're going to look at it, it should not be as prescriptive as Councillor Lewis has made it. And if Deputy Mayor Morgan wants to suggest amendments to the referral motion, I would be happy to hear them. And I do think that having the survey occur right after an election is actually a good thing, because it is fresh in people's minds. And I know how upset people get during these elections, and when they see all of these signs, I get the feedback. So I know that people are not happy with election signs and how our bylaw is written today. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. We're going to go to Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, for recognizing me and the opportunity to speak at committee today. I've volunteered with federal, municipal, and provincial campaigns everywhere from Windsor to the Danforth. And Councillor Cassidy is absolutely right that different cities do things very differently. Some cities have fees that candidates pay as a deposit in order to be allowed to put up signs to help offset the cost of bylaw resources that are taken from the municipality. Signs, setbacks, public property, it all varies per municipality. So my question to staff is, could you tell us how much it does cost, estimated or otherwise, to enforce all these bylaw complaints coming in about sight lines, placements, and roadway allotments?
Through the chair, if I could defer to enforcement for that question, perhaps Ms. Chapman.
Chair, I wouldn't have any exact figures for you, but I can tell you when we conduct enforcement around elections, we use existing staff. If we have an election that runs through the summer, we also, if we have students that we can hire on to assist the existing staff, we would put them in that position as well. So from my recollection, during the last election that ran through the summer, we did have one staff member and one student working on complaints under the election sign bylaw. That one staff member, as well as that one student, had other duties as well outside of election sign bylaw enforcement. The other thing to take into consideration is because of the limited resources we have, we respond to complaints under the sign bylaw, and election sign bylaw only. It's not proactive unless we were to see something that was definitely an immediate risk to the public, due to a sightline placement or something to that effect. So hopefully that answers the bulk of your question.
It does, thank you. And recognizing many residents will reach out to a candidate's campaign office directly with a concern because they don't know who to contact at the city to lodge a concern. So I do have that concern with, and I would be fine with no public property signs based on compliance and how it also takes up staffing resources. As per Councillor Lewis's point about the removal allotment of 4 days versus 3, absolutely, as candidates who run citywide or a larger riding versus ward allotment, it does take longer to get your resources back. Also seeing some campaigns start strong and volunteers fizzle and leave if the campaign isn't looking like it's going to be winning. Your resources for staffing at the end to help you remove those signs can be drastically changed. In regards to a point made that signs don't vote, absolutely a key portion of campaigning is go knock doors, go talk to those constituents, find out what matters, find solutions, and be busy engaging residents with debates and meet and greet meetings. Every time a campaign resource is taken up with signs, sign installation, maintenance, replacement. That's all valuable time and financial resources that could be taken and had been better spent actually engaging in conversation with people, residents, the people who are going to be impacted by these decisions. I also seen, having listened to conversation, it's almost sounding like sign intimidation of let's get our signs out the biggest, best, and fastest and intimidate anybody who might bring something else to the conversation, but not have as much experience with the campaign or financial resources to tackle our sign numbers. So I have concerns about that it's also a barrier to democracy and participation if you don't have the big money to back you, or people with pickup trucks, you can get out the giant rebar and T-bar and do all your sign installation for you, that if you don't have people with those resources, you're either stuck renting them or just not engaging in that, which will be seen as a potentially a weak campaign, a non-winning campaign, and someone who's not as desirable because you don't have as much financial backing. So those are some of my concerns about just barriers to democracy that we have a ability to go over. Also for plazas and public plazas where candidates put their signs, I've heard definitely from sign maintenance crews. I feel for them every time there's an election that signs pop up. They're accused of stealing them when the property owners tell them to take it down. Candidates complain that someone's harassing their campaign and stealing their stuff in regards, and plus the people trying to actually cut around and maintain those properties who are just working as well. So those are just an overview of my concerns so far, and thank you for the opportunity and the conversation today, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promised I'd come back with a few more comments, and I'll say right off the top, thank you, Your Worship, for saying my commentary was rather lucid. I think yours has been rather lucid today as well, so we're starting 2022 off on the right foot. I will say that, and again, not to, and I understand Your Worship's concern about getting things early. I will also share that I was in conversation with staff about language on this up until about 11:20 this morning. So unfortunately, sometimes these things come without a lot of notice because you've got to go back and forth a few times. So I've been listening to the debate, and I want to offer a few more thoughts on this. And I want to focus first on what Deputy Mayor Morgan was saying, and I fully agree with him. The lack of an impact assessment on these changes is a real concern for me. And the you know, basing changes on what seems to be a survey pretty exclusively is a concern to me without looking at the actual impacts on campaigns and elections. And there is lots of good information out there that I think needs to be considered. But, you know, here we are, and Councillor Cassidy asked right off the start about deadlines and how soon this could come back. And you know, that's why, in terms of being prescriptive, a lot of this referral says come back with something that doesn't change the setback, that doesn't change the removal period, that doesn't change the height in the 5 to 8 meter area. And so a lot of it is saying, listen, leave the bylaw the way it is for the most part right now. There's still the change to 20 meters instead of 10 meters. I'm not sure that I would go so far as Councillor Cassidy's suggestion of half a kilometer. But I think if we went 50 or even 100 meters, that might be something I'd be amenable to. And in fact, if she had a number that maybe wasn't half a kilometer, but was something somewhere in between that 20 and that 500 meters, I would be amenable to considering that in the referral. So I'll leave that for her to think about for a couple of minutes, because I know it's not a lot of time, but I wouldn't mind them being spaced out more on public property either. I think that certainly what we see along arterial roadways could be described as visual pollution. My difference of opinion is with the private signs in large part. I think that residents should be able to put up whatever size sign wherever they want on their front lawn, so long as it's not blocking a sightline triangle, which I believe, and when I conclude my comments, Madam Chair, I'll ask you to confirm this with staff, but I believe when we measure sight triangles at intersections, we are actually using a 3-meter measurement already. So the prescriptiveness is consistent with what's already in place. I think if we want to talk about no public location signs in the future, you know, that's a much bigger discussion to have with the public at large, as well as looking at the impacts that that has on the democratic process, because I don't think signs just create visual pollution. I think when Councillor Pelosa suggests, you know, you go out and you knock doors and you have meetings with people, absolutely, you do all that stuff. You know, I am quite, and I've made no bones about being proud of the fact that I got around my entire ward 2 times knocking on doors and started a 3rd lap in the last campaign. It's vitally important. But something that signs do is they remind the voters that, oh yeah, that's the person that I talked to. Because you may have talked to them in June, and you might not talk to them again until Election Day. But when they see your sign, whether it's on their lawn or whether it's on a public corner or along a public roadway, they remember who you were. So I think that they serve a purpose that way. I think that we also have to keep in mind there are volunteers who get involved in campaigns who aren't comfortable talking to people. They're not, but they're very comfortable helping out on the hours that they have by going to put up some signs. Some of them are willing to go up to front steps and put flyers in mailboxes, but they don't want to actually talk to somebody. And that's okay too. We need a space for those volunteers to help as well. And that's why I think at least private signs will continue to be part of a democratic process, in my view, for the foreseeable future. But I think when we're talking about the prescriptiveness of this referral, and I do want to bring it back to the referral, you know, what we're really saying in this referral is bring back something that doesn't make as many changes. We're still going to change from 10 meters to 20 meters, or perhaps something higher than that. But we're still going to make that change in the distance. What we're not going to do is start taking away a bunch of opportunities for people to put up signs on their lawns. We're not going to punish candidates if it takes them 4 days to get in their signs. And we're not going to say, you know, 90 centimeters is the tallest thing you can have 8 meters from the roadway. Because to the deputy mayor's point, there's no point in doing them at that point. And if we want to have that discussion about no public signs, then we should frankly have that discussion and not, you know, try and do it through these small restriction items. That's the point that I really, the section D, you know, I stood on that side of the chambers in 2017 and spoke to the council of the day about why that was wrong. And I actually brought in lawn signs and the medium size and then the large size signs and visually showed them what they were talking about. And it was, you would only be able to put up lawn signs. That was it. And if you're talking about 8 meters from a roadway like Wellington or Wonderland, then we're really talking about not putting up public signs, because a lawn sign 8 meters off of Wonderland Road is not going to be seen by anybody driving by. I think that that's a discussion that we could have moving forward in the future, but what we've got right now is 2 elections coming this year and a recommended bylaw that I think becomes too restrictive and makes too many changes, especially at a time when we are shifting back to a first past the post campaign. And so now you are going to have the reality of the consideration of vote splitting again, unlike in ranked ballots where people could choose their second and third choices. They're back to one choice, and they're really going to have to give that some thought. I think the mayor made an excellent point about the number of candidates who run municipally. So there is more municipal signs up just by virtue of the number of people in the race. But I think what we've got here is something that says for the time being, make a couple of changes, like the 10 meters to 20 meters. But we're not going to do all of these changes right now. And I think for all of the, you know, thoughts we have about how many complaints signs create, you know, when we look at the report, 369 complaints is what staff had registered in the report. So we had 1,000 people respond to the survey, but only 369 complaints about signs. And Councillor Pelosi is correct. Some complaints go directly to the campaign office and they don't ever get to municipal bylaw enforcement. But I think it's important to remember that almost 60,000 people voted in the municipal campaign. And we're going to change a sign bylaw based on a survey. And I say this respectfully. I am not trying to be critical of staff's work, but I looked at the survey. It was check boxes. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for what do you think the sign law should be. It was, should it be this or should it be that? Is it okay, or should there be less, or should there be more? That's a very hard thing to gauge a really good bit of public feedback on how to change a bylaw on. So I hope for now colleagues will support the referral. Certainly, as I indicated, if there's a suggestion for an addition to that referral, an amendment to it, I'm open to hearing that too. But I hope we can get to the point where we can provide some direction today so that staff can bring something back in time for the municipal and provincial elections this year.
Thank you. Councillor Fife Miller.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and through you. I think a couple of things here. One, the word impact comes up a lot, and I think when I read this report, one of the things that I didn't get to see in this report was the impact of the changes, which I think are extremely important. But I also think comparatives, and Councillor Cassidy brought up that she's been in other municipalities and they look different, and this is why they look different. But I think some comparatives on what other communities are doing and those best practices that they're going through. I also think, though, for me, one of the other things that is a challenge, there's a big difference to me between ridings and wards. Ridings are fairly balanced in this city, but when we break the city down to wards, whereas 5 meters in some wards really will have no impactful difference, 5 meters in other wards will have an extremely impactful difference on where those signs are available. I also think when you're looking at it from the input of whether or not you're putting signs in public space or not, again, when we look at some of our wards, public space is extremely limited. And having that public space extremely limited, we're pretty much destined that we're looking at private space to put signs up. And so when we're looking at that private space to put signs up, I think to limit it in a way that we're saying becomes a challenge. And I understand that we want to make a bylaw that covers the whole city. But I do think that we have to be careful on how we look at doing that, because the wards are significantly different. And so I just think that when we go through and we are doing this, we have to be respectful of the fact that this is going to affect everyone. It's not going to affect just you and your ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fife Miller. We're going to turn to Mayor Holder.
Thanks. I don't want to belabor the good comments that have been made by everybody, but I want to give from this perspective an all of city thought, because I know that most of us are focused rightly on our wards, and they represent, give or take, 1/14 of the city, unless you're talking about the deputy mayor, who I think his ward is half the city, but I'm not sure, but give or take. But I would say to you that what I get concerned about is when the staff recommendations are too prescriptive, and even when the referral gets too prescriptive. And you know, it's how you play Solomon and find the right and settle at the right point is the challenge that we're going through here. So that's why I think this discussion is valuable. I'm not going to weigh on too much, but just a couple of quick things. When I ran for mayor, I did not knock on every door. Physically, frankly, impossible for me. We were allowed to spend up to $225,000, give or take. I think it was a couple of thousand less than that. We raised something just around 200,000. And we relied on brochures. Heck, we relied on bus advertising. We relied on brochures, the signs of various sizes, some of our website comms, all these kinds of things that we did. And it took all the money that we raised to be able to do that. And I share that with you because a bigger ward may not be able to go door to door all the time, not sure. But what we don't want, I think, any of us, is one thing that necessarily favors the incumbent, unless we're the incumbent, I suppose. But I don't think we really want to do that. I think we want to, I think the sense I'm hearing from everyone is to do something that's fair, that's not ugly, that is reasonable. Too much distance between two signs. I'm not as excited about that. I can tell you frankly, getting rid of signs altogether. Look, here's what's clear. Signs are advertising. And one of the things you learn in business about advertising is that half it works and the other half doesn't. If you only knew which half worked, that's where you dedicate your money and your efforts that way. So what do? We try to do a catch-all campaign that has bits and bytes of a lot of things. But signs, for any and all of us, I would dare say, was an integral part to our efforts to become elected or to be in the position that we are today. It matters. So that's what I'll come back to the original point. This whole issue of being a little bit too prescriptive, either on the staff or on the referral side, is I'd like to see some flexibility on both, and then we'll take another run at it. It sounds like we have some time, and we'll do a thoughtful consideration for this upcoming provincial, as well as then our own come the fall. So I'll just leave that for your thoughts. And I don't know if Councillor Morgan's Deputy Mayor, whether you had some ideas on ameliorating the referral a bit, but I heard the Councillor Lewis say that he was amenable to some changes. Some I am, some not. But anyway, I'll leave it there. But thank you, Chair, for this.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm also going to mention that there's many places in Ward 1 on the arterial roads where 5 meters simply would make it impossible for somebody to have a sign on their lawn. And I think in terms of the residences, we should be as least prescriptive as possible, whereas on city property, we can be as prescriptive as we like. The other thing I'd mention is the rule that says you can't have a sign between the roadway and the sidewalk. And I do notice there are many places in the city where the sidewalk is very far from the road. And so that makes that rule a little challenging, because there is the presumption that the sidewalk is close to the road and then property after that, but that's not always the case. So we might want to think about an exception there. I don't know if that's necessary for this round of changes. It seems like we've got some more pertinent ones to deal with here. But again, let's have it be not very prescriptive on personal residences, and then more prescriptive where we can do that.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. We are going to move over to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I just want to point out for everyone, and I do agree, first of all, that allowing people to display within reason what they would display on their private property is within their right, and we should preserve that. I want to point out, however, that everything where we talk about these meters and placement of signs, that all deals with Section 4 of the bylaw, which is specifically election signs on public property. So just so you know, so everybody is aware, when we're talking about all of those measurements and everything, it's under Section 4, which is election signs on public property. So I I'm anxious to hear what the deputy mayor has to say. I would look to Councillor Lewis to see if he would amend his referral motion to say, and I can't remember, I'm sorry, it's under section 4, I believe, but the part where it talks about the distance between two signs of the same candidate, that the distance be at least 100 meters. And I'll look to Councillor Lewis to see if he views that as a friendly amendment.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Councillor Cassidy, I would absolutely see that as friendly, and I would be comfortable with having that in the referral as well.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Presiding Officer. Thank you, Councillor Lewis. That is 4.5, section 4.5, item I on that list. And I just do want to make one final comment. I'm very supportive of Councillor Pelosa's comments about signs on public property. I think that it would not be unreasonable to at some point get to the point where we say no election signs on public property. We already do it with parks, which is public property. We already do it around City Hall, which is public property. And also that delineation between what is public property and what is private property can be very tricky at times. For example, Masonville Mall, there are no signs allowed anywhere near Masonville Mall, and security will remove them, even if they are on the public right-of-way. So if you were to go across the street to the Loblaws, there's a big empty green space right directly in front of Loblaws. That is not technically Loblaws property. It is the city right-of-way, and it's always full of election signs. So Loblaws knows it's not their property. They leave them alone. Masonville Mall doesn't view it the same way. And I'm perfectly fine with both approaches, but I'm just pointing out that that difference between public and private property is not always clear. And also in the interest of the environment and visual clutter, I would absolutely at some point support removing signs from public property altogether.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Deputy Mayor Josh Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. So this is getting, this discussion really is illuminating my point, but I don't think we really understand, nor do I think the public, of the implications of these changes. The suggestion to move to 100 meters of spacing between signs, like that sounds like a great idea if you envision driving down Wonderland Road and saying there needs to be space between these things. But if you think about it, basically wipes out your opportunity to put signs on more than one corner at an intersection. When people are traveling different directions, maybe that's not something that we want to restrict, but that would probably be an implication of switching to 100 meters. So what I think we could do that would allow everybody to be happy with moving forward, at least I'm hopeful, is that perhaps Councillor Lewis is willing to amend his motion to not throw all the things he wants to consider the changes to off the table, but perhaps let's give us one more committee meeting at this where these changes can be contemplated, but also staff can bring forward some information on exactly what this looks like in reality on our streets, and anything that they can share on the democratic benefits or consequences of more or less election signs. Most of the changes we're talking about here lead to more or less election signs on public property. And I think that's as simple as you got to get to it. It's clear what the members who filled out the survey would like us to see, but I'm happy to move forward with some of their changes if there aren't significant implications to it. But I'm not even sure we fully understand what this means. We spent a ton of time talking about 5 meters, and still I think there are members of council who might not be clear on whether this applies to someone's lawn or not, because it's in public property section of the report. Once you get past that road allowance, it would be my understanding that you could stick up whatever size sign you want on your front lawn within the restrictions of the general sign bylaws within the city, because it doesn't refer here. But I'm not sure that's clear for everybody. I'm not sure whether staff would interpret it the same way I'm interpreting it. And so what I'm saying is perhaps we can readjust this motion to have these as options that we can consider, but also not say incorporate them into the draft bylaw, but come back with an impact assessment of the potential changes that are being contemplated in this bylaw. And if you want to throw some things specifically in there that you want to exclude, I do think that there are things in here that if I read it, like the 72 to 96, like, yeah, you know what? Councilor Lewis makes a great point. That's really about giving volunteers times to take down signs. That's to be honest, probably the best funded, well-organized campaigns who win probably get down their signs a lot easier than those who don't. And it seems very, very punitive to ding people who might not have the resources or might not have won in getting their signs down under a really tight timeline. So I think there are fair and reasonable changes we can make, but I really want to understand the implications of them. So I don't know if Councillor Lewis is willing to adjust his motion, because if he's not, we can just vote on it. But if he is, then like, let's find some consensus here to get what I think we're all agreeing on, and that's some more information about the impacts of these changes, because we have slightly different opinions on where to go on these.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. We're going to move over to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Chair. Well, the Deputy Mayor was speaking, the clerks in their great wisdom have suggested a slight change, and that it say that the draft bylaw be referred back to Civic Administration in order to consider the following changes to the draft bylaw. We can keep all 6 of the bullet points there. That includes Councillor Cassidy's amendment of the 100 meters. And then if this is what the Deputy Mayor is, so this would be for staff to consider. And then if there needs to be another bullet on this that says, you know, the staff include an impact assessment in their considerations. If that's what you're looking for, Deputy Mayor, I'd be okay with something like that as well. But I wonder if just changing from incorporate to consider provides what you're looking for in terms of giving our staff the opportunity to go look at these and come back in the next cycle through the presiding chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I think we've exhausted our speakers list, so I think it's time to call the question. If nobody else has any, the clerk.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just working on this amended wording, which I'd like to have the committee review before we open the vote, respectfully through the chair, as well as confirmation that the seconder is comfortable with the changes that we'll put up momentarily. So if you could just give us a quick moment.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yeah, Councillor Lewis asked a question about my thoughts on the language. I think as the clerk's working on this, and I kind of wanted to jump in so that she could hear these thoughts, instead of in order to incorporate, it would be in order to consider and report back on the impacts of the draft bylaw and the possible changes listed below, or some wordsmith language of that the clerks has. Like that would make me more comfortable, because it's not as definitive. We're getting information back. It doesn't matter to me if I like all of the bullet points under that. I'm willing to support a motion that gets us information and impacts back on those bullet points, regardless of whether I agree with any individual one of them or not. That's a very comfortable approach to me.
Thank you. The clerk, Schultes.
Yes, presiding chair, I just had a question about one of the suggestions about changing the election sign permission to be placed no earlier than 1 week prior to nomination day for nominated candidates. I'm just seeking clarification from the mover of the motion that is distinct from a campaign office, because the current wording makes a distinction between all persons and a sign placed on a campaign office. So I'm just seeking clarification on that suggested bullet point.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, and through you to the city clerk. Yes, that is apart from the campaign office. That is specific to the candidate's individual signs for public or private distribution.
Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Chair. I would also be interested for us to have some pretty clear wording around the what it means to have a road allowance. I should say, what does the road allowance mean? Is that public property? Are we talking about it that way, or is that going to be private property? I was mentioning that in my ward on some of the arterials, it certainly couldn't be 5 meters back. There's places there where people's where the road allowance is right up to somebody's porch. So that is an issue there, and I think we should make that really clear. Personally, I believe that if putting a sign on a property makes it look like you have support from those individuals, then you should have support from the owners, and shouldn't be able to just put a sign up there because it's a road allowance. Ruling in that way might affect some signs on intersections as well, but we may have to think about that. Nevertheless, I would like to have that be clear, so there's some understanding about how a road allowance might affect a private property owner. Thank you.
Clerk Schultes, your hand is still up. I'm wondering if you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, Presiding Chair, I just had a follow-up just to the councillor's query there, and I was wondering if Ms. Raycroft or Ms. Corman could address the road allowance query that he had.
Through the chair, this is Ms. Raycroft here. The definition of road allowance is contained in two parts. It's contained within the definition of roadway, and then as well within the definition of street. When you see street indicated in the bylaw, it essentially indicates public property, which would be the road allowance.
Thank you. Okay, I think we.
So,
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes. So, just for follow up, then. So I have some space on my lawn, which is reserved for the road allowance. It's a few meters, and so for purposes of my own lawn, if it's more than 3 meters, that means that someone could put a sign on my lawn, or what I consider my lawn, and that would be still on public property. Is that a correct interpretation?
Through the chair, yes. If that property was considered the road allowance, it would be considered public property. If it was within 3 meters of the roadway, the current bylaw, the candidate would be able to place a sign there legally, as long as it was not considered a sightline or traffic concern.
Okay. That's interesting to know. I don't know if that's, I think that's something that we should address. So, but I'll leave it to the committee to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready to call the question? Okay, we're ready to go. Okay, so we're going to call the question. Sure, yes, please. Please read it.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion reads as follows: that the draft bylaw be referred back to the Civic Administration in order to consider the following changes to the draft bylaw. A, maintaining the setback distance at the current 3 meters, which is section 4.5B. B, maintaining the current removal period at 96 hours, which is section 3.4. Part C, incorporate clarification around signage of a campaign office that allows signs on the property without being physically attached to the building. Part D, remove the height restriction of 0.9 meters in the 5 to 8 meters of the roadway regulation, which is section 4.6 Part A. Part E, amend the distance between election signs of the same candidate to 100 meters, which is section 4.5I. And F, change the election sign permission to be placed no earlier than 1 week prior to nomination day for nominated candidates. It being noted that there will be a report back to the Corporate Services Committee with respect to the above noted proposed changes, as well as information relating to impacts of any proposed changes.
So Chair, I have a question if I can, please, and that is, of the two E's, in the first E that says amend the distance between election signs of the same candidate to 100 meters, I don't support that. Having said it, so we could either split that out, or if it's covered in the catch-all that says that staff will come back with a report to corporate services with respect to those changes, I can live with that if again, as long as the first E is not so prescriptive that that's the only direction that staff will consider. So maybe just some advice.
Clerk?
Thank you. Through the chair, there is only one E now, but yes, the intent of this, the wording of this motion is for a report back, so it could be considered when this comes back to the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to call the question then? All right.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Chair back to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and I hope that was fun for you in your first opportunity to chair a debate. We certainly gave you lots of back and forth. That concludes the consent agenda, and we move on to item 3 on the schedule is scheduled items, of which there are none. Item 4 is items for direction, and we will deal with these one at a time. The first item is 4.1, the first report of the city/county liaison committee. And I'll look to see if there's a mover to get that on the floor, and then any moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Fife Miller, and we'll look for any discussion on that. I'm seeing none, so we can call to question on that.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
And moving to is an application for an issuance of proclamation for Black History Month. Look for a mover and a seconder for that, and then any discussion. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Looking for any speakers. I see none, so we will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
And item is amendments to members' council proof of vaccination policy that includes communications from Councillor Van Holst, a staff report, and a second communication from Councillor Van Holst. And I'll look to committee to see if there's some direction on how you want to deal with this. And I'll start with Deputy Mayor Morgan, and then we'll go to the mayor.
Yeah, I would. I think that Councillor Van Holst wrote a letter, and so I'm happy to hear from him on the contents of his letter. At the appropriate time, Mr. Chair, I'm willing to put the staff report's recommendations on the floor and receipt of the other correspondence. But I do think it's appropriate when a councillor writes a letter to hear from them on their issue.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So do you want to move the staff recommendation and the receipt of the communications then? Is that what I'm hearing? Or do you want to wait for further?
I will allow the councillor to speak first. He wrote the letter first, but then that is my intent. So I'm just letting colleagues know that's what I'd like to do.
Okay, thank you. And I've got Mayor Holder on the speakers list. Mayor Holder.
Thanks. I was actually happy to do that, to actually move that motion to receive the report to accept the recommendation of staff and receive the reports of Councillor Van Holst. And I'm still prepared to move that subject to the Deputy Mayor, but if you would like to defer that for Councillor Van Holst's comments, that's fine, in which case I'll be happy to second it.
Well, I think it's always important that we focus our debate and discussion around motions that are actually on the floor as much as possible. So if you're comfortable moving receipt and the staff recommendation, Your Worship, and perhaps the Deputy Mayor is willing to second that, and then we can have our discussion with a motion actually on the floor.
That's fine. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
I'll follow the guidance of the chair as well in a second.
All right, so we have a mover and a seconder for the staff recommendations and receipt of the communications. I will start a speakers list now. Councillor Van Holst, you did submit 2 communications to us, so I will let you speak to those now if you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for their willingness to have me expound a little bit on the communications. Of course, the Deputy Mayor is very interested in an alignment between the staff policies and the council policy, and that leaves an opening for us to do something slightly differently, which is to not just adopt the staff policy as it is, but to direct staff to have their policy be like ours. My concern, of course, with the policy is that we're creating 2 classes of employees or counselors and treating them differently. And any time that happens, there's some risks. And so I think in this instance, we may be better off without taking those risks. I don't know that the discrimination between the 2, and I'm not using that in a human rights term. It's just that we're treating 2 things differently. I'll use those 2 phrases interchangeably. We're looking at one different from the other, but sometimes it can be seen as a human rights type of discrimination, which is what we want to avoid. In this, in this instance, I want to point out that one of the things that I think is the worst result of the pandemic is the loss of respect that's taken place between family members, between friends, between people who work together, because they have different opinions on how it should be dealt with, and that's one of the things we should try to prevent. And I think that having a bylaw that treats people differently exacerbates that. And there's been staff members who've written me and said they don't feel like there's a respectful workplace because people are acting on those opinions. And I think treating people differently will again, as I said, exacerbate that. I'd point out that the vaccines weren't quite what we hoped they would be. I know there's been the metaphor, Mr. Chair, you used it, that it's like a hard hat and safety boots, but when we look at the actual performance of the vaccines, it's not that. I said in my communications, it's maybe like a toque and sandals, but it doesn't prevent contraction, doesn't prevent transmission. The other challenge that we're facing now is we're seeing vaccine side effects as well. And I think because of those 2 reasons, there's no actual moral high ground here where one group has done the right thing with respect to their vaccine choices.
Point of order, Chair.
The wrong thing.
Sorry, Your Worship, go ahead.
I've listened to this for some time, and what I get particularly concerned about is when anyone, be it a member of council or someone without the appropriate credentials, speaks to issues as if they were fact. And I think that this does a disservice to folks, and I'm not going to get into that opinion of it, but I'm going to challenge the credentials of our colleague here who is presenting his conjecture as fact. And I think that's not only offensive, but I do believe as a point of order, that's exceptionally misleading.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Van Holst, do you wish to withdraw any of your comments in light of the mayor's point of order? Because I do think that he raises a valid point that neither yourself nor other members of council are qualified in terms of our technical training to be providing factual information on efficiencies of vaccines and matters of those natures. We're reliant on what the public health officials provide us.
Okay, well, I believe that I'm simply quoting information that is out there. I believe it's public knowledge that the vaccines don't prevent transmission and they don't prevent contraction. But I think that's from personal experience as well.
Councillor Van Holst, I don't think that, to my knowledge, and again, respectful of your opinion, I don't believe I've ever heard our medical officer of health or our Ontario Science Table lead or anyone else say that the vaccines were going to prevent transmission. And so when you're speaking like that, you're actually putting words into the mouths of the people who are in leadership positions here. So again, I just need to caution you, it's one thing to have an opinion, it's another thing to be presenting opinion as fact. And I think you're getting close to the line on that. I think the mayor's point of order was raised in a respectful way to suggest that you're skating the line here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I will talk about the tests then themselves. I know that my wife has a small business and she's been offered some tests through a government program, and she's required to sign an agreement which says that she acknowledges and agrees that the kits haven't been authorized by Health Canada for asymptomatic screening, that they cannot diagnose whether an individual has COVID-19, and that they do yield false negative and false positive results. So I see that seems to me like there's some questionable value about pursuing those as a means of asymptomatic screening. And then the next thing I wanted to do, and maybe this is a question for our staff, in this agreement, it also says that you're required to, where it is, you're required to represent and warrant to Canada that they'll secure the prior informed consent of the individuals participating. And so I want to know if that is the same restrictions that our city is under for using these tests for screening.
Okay, thank you for that question. I am going to look to see perhaps if Ms. Livingston wants to comment on the screening process.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I got thrown there a little bit. I believe I'm answering the question around those staff that need to participate in testing and the process around that. So what's important to understand is that the staff that are involved in this program are those that have provided attestations. And under our approach, we have developed with each of those individual staff an individual COVID plan. For those that have attestations, in some instances that may mean remote work, which means they do not come into a facility, or it may mean that they are participating in the regular testing. So that is a plan that is developed individually with each affected employee.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Van Holst, does that address your question for you?
Thanks. That make the policy very clear, and I appreciate that. And I I do think there's a lot of virtue in the policy we had previously. This one, again, treats people a little differently. However, I don't think it's a bad policy. I have some concerns about its effects. So the question was, are we required to, as was said here, to represent and warrant to Canada that will secure the prior informed consent for people participating with in these tests? Do we have that prescription as a municipality?
Okay, I will go back to our city manager, Ms. Livingston, to see if she
I apologize,
has a comment
Mr.
she can
Chair.
offer.
I don't know the specific answer to that question. I wasn't informed the question was going to be asked, so I can follow up later if that's necessary. But I just want to reiterate, in terms of individual staff participation in the program, it is an individual program that is part of each step for the staff people.
Thank you for that, Ms. Livingston, and I think that that's perfectly fair. Councillor Van Holst, are you satisfied if Ms. Livingston follows up with you between now and the council meeting on the more specific prescriptive question that you had?
Mr. Chair, that would be fine if that's the case. I'd appreciate that. And also thanks staff for coming up with an individual program. I think that is a good step and a good model for other companies that are going to be implementing similar policies. And I've said that previously about our own. So thank you. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I had both Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Morgan, Deputy Mayor Morgan, on my speakers list. I'm not sure which one of you actually raised your hand first, so I'm going to go to Councillor Cassidy first, acknowledging that she's the current chair of the Middlesex London Health Unit.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also, you could have done it alphabetically if you weren't sure, so same result. I wonder, first of all, if we can separate out the votes on these, on Councillor Van Holst's submissions and the staff report. And I would have moved take no action on the councillor's submissions. And I would hope that the mover might consider adding that to his motion. We've heard from this from Councillor Van Holst time and time again over the last 2 years on these kinds of issues. And it doesn't matter how many times Councillor Van Holst brings these items forward, he generally is the sole vote on his side of the issue. There's a difference between.
So I'm sorry, can I just mention, just to help Councillor Cassidy, I'm prepared to, if the seconder will do it, and that you carry on from there to amend that to take no action on Councillor Van Holst's report and put that in that main motion. I apologize. I should have considered that before. Sorry, Chair.
Well, you could have done that after Councillor Cassidy had finished speaking, Your Worship, but it's still generous of you to offer to do that. However, since we have interrupted Councillor Cassidy at this point, I'm just going to ask the clerks if they can clarify how the motion is set up currently, and that may help people understand where we are.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion that's before you reads as follows: that on the recommendation of the city clerk, the proposed bylaw as appended to the staff report dated January 10th, 2022, to amend the members of council proof of COVID-19 vaccination policy be introduced at the municipal council meeting to be held on January 25th, 2022. It being noted that the communications dated December 23rd, 2021 and January 6th, 2022 from Councillor M. Van Holst were received.
So currently it is an it being noted rather than a part A and B. If colleagues wish to deal with it as a part A and B and vote on those separately, we can also take that approach. But currently what we've got is the receipt of the communications as in it being noted. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Councillor Cassidy to let her continue and to see if she's got some direction that she would like to pursue with that now that the clerk has read out what's on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we've been dealing with this for quite some time, and we've been dealing with vaccines specifically for about a year now. We've heard in many public settings from our medical officer of health, from the chief medical officer of health of Ontario, from the minister of health, from various multiple people who are trained in this area, trained in public health, trained in infectious diseases, trained in immunology. We have a counselor who was the head of infectious diseases at the Middlesex London Health Unit for a number of years, and he has spoken to us directly. We know what public health is telling us, and they are the experts we should turn to in these times. I'm going to speak specifically about the policy. The policy is not about treating people as different kinds of citizens or discriminating against anybody. The policy is about keeping members of staff, members of council, and members of the public as safe as we possibly can, as safe as our ability to make policy allows us to. It is a multi-layered approach, including remote work, including personal protective equipment, including vaccinations and quarantining and isolating when necessary. It is not about a blanket, one vaccine will fix the whole thing for everybody. There are a number of people in our community, in our workforce, and in our families who cannot be vaccinated, or for whom the vaccinations are not as effective as they are for some other people. It is about our ability to put as many measures in place so that we can open up our society and so that we can keep our vulnerable safe. I'm going to speak about my own personal situation. I know Councillor Van Holst has shared his personal situation in the past. I'm one of the caregivers for my father, who's 88 years old, legally blind. He has multiple health issues. I have to go to his house 4 times a month. He cannot be alone. I am doing everything in my power, including vaccinations and booster shots, to keep myself safe so that I don't kill my father. At the end of the day, that's my goal. So that is why I have asked the mover and seconder to take no action on this, because I am so tired of talking about this. I'm tired of misinformation and disinformation being spread from the council floor.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. And I just want to come back to you for clarity. You're asking that the receipt be dealt with rather than in it being noted as an action, and that we take no action as part of that receipt?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. And I know the mayor indicated he was amenable to that. Deputy Mayor Morgan,
Yes.
You were the seconder. You're okay with that? I see your hands up. So we're just going to give the clerks a moment to adjust what we'll be voting on.
And Chair, sorry for interrupting you and the learned Councillor Cassidy. I was so keen to amend that motion. So thank you for your interdiction.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not a problem there. I know you were just eager to get this item dealt with and understand that. Do we have any, I don't see anybody on screen in chambers. Do we have anybody else to speak to the item before we call to question? Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I just want to explain my rationale for being supportive of taking no action, because I think it's important to explain why you would do that. In the councillor's letter, he suggests a specific action that staff would take, and I think it's appropriate if committee wants to make a recommendation to take no action. It makes it very definitive that we're not interested in entertaining the action that was suggested in the letter. So I'm happy to vote on it that way. It's not something that I think we do very often, but I think it can be justified at times.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I don't see any other speakers, so if the committee will indulge me just for a moment to speak from the chair on this. I actually very much appreciate Councillor Cassidy asking for it to be dealt with in this way. I am much more comfortable receiving this with taking no action. I wasn't actually particularly comfortable receiving it. And I say this with all due respect to the councillor with his submission. When I start reading submissions that are speculative about people in your immediate circle having reactions to a vaccine that which are not backed up by and should not be in a public communication, but quite frankly, the public health data doesn't suggest that, and I find that to be of concern and frankly of misinformation and misleading the public when that happens. So I was reluctant to even receive the communication, but if we're going to receive and take no action, I'm a little more comfortable with that because I think it's a little more definitive than receiving. So that's my thoughts that I just wanted to share with the committee, and we'll see if the clerks have the motion ready. The clerk is nodding. It's updated on the screens and on eScribe. So I'll just look to see if there's any more comments before we call the question. And seeing none, we'll call the question on this.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Thank you, clerk. Moving on, that completes the items for direction, deferred matters and additional business. We do have one added, and that is the application for an issuance of proclamation for the National Day of Remembrance of the Quebec City Mosque Attack and Action Against Islamophobia. And I'll look to see Councillor Hamou, you're moving that. Councillor Fife Miller is seconding. I'll look to see if there's any discussion. Mayor Holder?
Thank you very much. Just through you to staff, just to see how, because we're talking about this as a national remembrance, and I had very specific discussions with the mayor of Quebec City, which is referenced in this motion. And we brought in the, by virtue, frankly, of the efforts of our letter and those of so many, we were able to have that summit that was had been discussed and promised, but we got specifics on it. But my question through you, Chair, is this. If we're talking about a National Day of Remembrance, that presumes that nationally that the federal government is working towards this as well. So I'm just wondering if staff have received any communication from the individuals requesting the National Day of Remembrance, if in fact this is national in its scope.
Well, I'm not sure if staff will have an answer to that or not, Your Worship, but I will look to the city clerk to see if he's aware of any communications indicating a national observance.
To the chair, I am not, but I would welcome Ms. Westlake Power to jump in if she is aware of any communication.
Through the chair, all of the information that we have is attached to the agenda for your consideration.
Thank you, clerks. Your Worship.
So, Chair, I'm not sure where to go with this. I think you will get full support from committee and council because London was a strong leader of the summit dealing with Islamophobia. So, but what I would like to get at some sense of, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to defer this to our next meeting, if we can reach out to the individuals behind the request and just get that broader background to determine if in fact what we need to do is this intended as leverage to get this recognized. That wasn't 100% clear to me, and to be fair, I didn't reach out to the respondent in this case. You're going to find strong support, but I'm just not sure if it's leverage or whether we're a part of a movement to support this across the country. So I'm just wondering through you if it makes sense to defer this one cycle so that we can do the right thing, and maybe someone has better insight than I do into this.
So, Your Worship, I'm going to get some comment from staff as well. I'm also just going to share with you from the perspective of the LGBTQ community, there have been community recognized national days of observance that have not been necessarily recognized by the federal government in certain circumstances. But I see our city manager is on the line to offer some comment, and I believe the clerk has some as well. So first we'll go to Ms. Livingston, and then we'll go to Ms. Westlake Power.
Mr. Chair, I stand to be corrected, but I believe that this has been declared a National Day of Remembrance. I believe that was done early about this time last year, recognizing January 29th. So I believe it is a national recognition. We can work to try and confirm that, but that's my understanding, is that it is a national recognition in place already, not an effort to have it recognized.
Thank you, Ms. Livingston. That's, as always, very helpful. And I think the clerk of the committee has some comment as well, Your Worship, which I think will probably indicate there's no time to defer.
Through the chair, that is correct. I just want to confirm that the date being requested is for January 29th, so we could not accommodate a referral and still bring that through before that date.
Thank you for that, clerk. Before I go to Deputy Mayor Morgan, Your Worship, does that answer your questions? Did you have further comment or question?
No, it does, and particularly based on what you've offered up as comments, Chair, I'm prepared to support.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yeah, I'll support this as well. I think that the mayor made a good point. Given the timelines, there's time for our staff to look into this before it hits the council meeting next week and ensure that the answers to colleagues' questions are there. Whether it's a National Day of Remembrance or a Day of Remembrance, because the City of London can't proclaim something nationally, pretty sure we could figure it out at council once we've got all the questions. But today, I think we should pass it and move it to the next step.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I'm going to go to Councillor Hamou.
I was just gonna say that I did find some information that the Liberal government declared January 29th the National Day of Remembrance last year.
Thank you, Councillor Hamou. So I think that answers your question, Your Worship. And I see some nodding there. So seeing no other hands up, we'll call the question on this item.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Colleagues, we on the agenda, that is confidential matters. So just before I look for a motion to go into camera, just for the public's information, we are going into camera on 4 items, the purposes of which are related to land acquisition, solicitor-client privileged advice, land disposition, solicitor-client privileged advice, land acquisition, and personal matters, identifiable individual labor relations matter. So those are the 4 items and the 3 reasons for which we'll be going in camera. So I'll look for a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Fife Miller, and we'll call the question.
Mayor Holder? Closing the vote, the motion is passed 5-0.
I'll just let you know that Mayor Holder has left the meeting. I don't know whether he's going to be able to rejoin us or not. We'll just need a couple minutes to shuffle the proverbial deck chairs so that we have the right people in the room for the items that we are dealing with in camera.